Hello everyone, and welcome back to another Live at 5 tour. I am Kevin Adkisson, the curator with the Cranbrook Center for Collections and Research. And today I am coming to you live from the Cranbrook Collections Wing attached to the Art Museum. And we are in the Archives Reading Room. So this is a place where I did a tour long ago, perhaps even before the Live at 5 started saving. And so I'm not sure if you can even look back and see that tour. But I have pulled out a number of treasures for you to learn about today. And if you have not ever been to Cranbrook Archives, it is a division of the Cranbrook Center for Collections and Research. And so these are the archives of not just the Cranbrook institutions, things like corporate records and donor records and all types of collections related to students who have come through Cranbrook. All of the yearbooks of Cranbrook schools are back here, but it's also records that are affiliated with Cranbrook. So artists and architects who have come through Cranbrook, worked at Cranbrook, studied at Cranbrook, or in the case of Eero Saarinen, are some of the designers of Cranbrook. And so next Tuesday, October 27th at 10 a.m. and again at 7 p.m., I will be delivering a lecture on Eero Saarinen and his designs for Yale University. And I thought that it would be fun today to look at one of Eero Saarinen's drawings from college. And so most of his archives are at Yale, in Yale's collection of manuscripts and archives, but a few of his records came here to Cranbrook. And I don't actually know entirely how this record ended up sort of separate from the rest. The way that Yale ended up with Eero Saarinen's records, they came in two waves. Once in the 1990s, when his second wife, Aileen Lusheim Saarinen, passed away and left her records to Yale, which is when a lot of the watercolors by Aileen and many of the student records of Eero's went to Yale. And then back in 2004 or thereabouts, the architecture firm of Kevin Roach and John Dinkeloo gave Yale the rest of Eero's material. So what we have here at Cranbrook Archives were gifts to Cranbrook either from Loya Saarinen herself. They are drawings of Cranbrook's buildings that Cranbrook owned from the get-go, or they came in through other architects and artists who were associated with Eero Saarinen. So today, that's a little bit of background about Cranbrook Archives and the collection that we have here related to America's great Finnish-American architect Eero Saarinen. And today we will be focusing on this drawing, though I've pulled out a few pieces for us to look at over the course of this Live at 5. I hope that the connection is stable since we're actually in a modern building that has internet, and that we can really get into some of the details of this drawing. So let's start down with the corner here. We see Eero Saarinen's name, Yale University, Class B project, a residence for a college dean. And so what is a Class B design, which then we see it repeated here for the Yale School of the Fine Arts? Yale at the time was practicing in the Beaux-Arts manner of architectural education. And in the Beaux-Arts school of architectural training, it was modeled after the French Academy of Architecture. And so students would enter into Class C, Class B, Class A as sort of freshmen, sophomore, seniors. And they would work their way up through a system of very regimented formal problems. And so a residence for a college dean would have actually been distributed across all of the Beaux-Arts academies in America. That included Yale, it included Georgia Tech, the Beaux-Arts Academy in New York, University of Pennsylvania. So it would not have just been Eero Saarinen and his classmates designing a residence for a college dean, it would have been architecture students across the country. They would have been given the assignment and they would have done their initial sketch, the esquisse, and that sketch they would have done in a certain amount of time, perhaps 1 hour, 30 minutes, 2 hours, depending on the scale of the project. They would submit the sketch, and then everything that came after that had to relate to the initial idea. And this would have been the second part of it. So he's already sketched out his idea for the college dean in a quick drawing, and now this is the more formal drawing, but it still would have been a timed process. And so something like this, Eero might have done in 8 hours, 16 hours, but it still would have been sitting down, and everything about the Beaux-Arts method of education was very much directed to the student. So the student was told how big of a sheet to make it. They were told what to show. So we have the elevation at the top, the plan in the middle, the section at the bottom, and then a little axonometric or projected drawing here. And all of this would have been required, and it would have the instructions would have been coming from the Central Beaux-Arts Academy in New York City. Now, we'll just zoom in next to this mark here, which if you speak French and if you're familiar with the Beaux-Arts, you know that this is not a good sign to have written in red chalk on the drawing. We see here the stamp of the Academy of the Beaux-Arts of America. So this is the American version of the French school. No relation other than name with the more famous school in France. And this drawing would have been shipped to New York, where very different from the student critiques of today, where the critics all sit in chairs in front of the student and you talk about the drawings and models to the student. You just mailed this off and you got written feedback. And this feedback here is the really not good sign. This stands for hors concours, or does not compete. And so that means at some point Eero has failed to meet the competition brief. And that could be that this design is too far away from his initial sketch, and so he's disqualified himself that way. It could be that that he did not finish the assignment, that he didn't create the exact layout they wanted, or it could mean that it was simply a bad design. And so after that, you then have the different medals. So you have first medal, second medal, third medals, and then you have a grand prize winner. Saarinen, though he did not compete with this drawing, he became known as Second Medal Saarinen for always coming in second place in national, international, and intra-Yale competitions. So it is interesting, before we get into the drawings, and we're going to walk through this whole floor plan, I'll just tell you a little bit, a precursor to next week's lecture, when you'll get the full story with illustrations and archival materials about how Eero ended up at Yale. But it is interesting to me that his father, at this point, 1931, already had architecture students here at Cranbrook. They were advanced students, people like Edmund Bacon, who had already studied and were practicing architecture. But it is totally conceivable that his son, having graduated from high school in Birmingham, could have come and studied architecture with his father as either a student at the Academy of Art or simply an apprentice in his firm. That would have been a very common way of becoming an architect. Eero hated public school. He did not understand why his parents sent him to public school. He felt he was much more intelligent than his classmates, much more talented, but also much more shy, and they made fun of him for his accent and for his foreignness as an immigrant. Instead of staying close to home and learning from his father, though, he heads off to Yale. Aliel wrote to the dean and said, my boy would like to come to Yale, and the dean wrote back saying, we'd love to have your boy. That was the extent of the application for one of the world's most famous architects' son. He gets to Yale and he's embedded in this Beaux-Arts method, this highly regimented, highly sort of controlled way of architectural drawing. And you'll see in next Tuesday's lecture that he'll begin to sort of rebel from this Beaux-Arts method. But it does give him this really solid classical training in architecture that he'll spend the rest of his life breaking away from. But it is a very traditional method of education. And most of all, I think that the Yale education helped Americanize Eero. He makes friends and contacts that will become important throughout his career, men who commission his designs or who come and work for his office. It's also how he gets connected to the US government and works for the OSS as a draftsman and designer in World War II. So this is a piece that he did in his first year as a special student at the Yale School of Fine Arts in the architecture department. And it's a residence for a college dean. So we'll start by studying this little rendering in 3 dimensions of the building. And you see that we are looking at the building into the courtyard. And you have the living room running here with its tall windows, and then the dining room runs here. But we already start to see certain details that are very much inspired by his father's buildings at Cranbrook. So things like this central chimney that's projecting out is almost a 1-for-1 for the edge condition of Saarinen House. And then if we look at the facade of the building, we see even more sort of Cranbrook details. Pieces like the sort of telescoping 3-part, almost mastaba shape coming up, which of course would be built at Kingswood in this same year. So this drawing is from 1931 to 1932, so the same time Kingswood is being built. We also see Eero's, just his talent with sort of cartoons. And I love the way that the landscape becomes these little scholars here with the champagne flute in his hand and the sort of blue and red noses and then the cap and gown. And just the way that it blends seamlessly into the frame that he gives the residence for a college dean. So if we come over and we look closer at the building, we see this beautiful coloring of the blue and red on the windows. And you have these steel frame sash windows that have what look like decorative stained glass fixtures. His sister Pipson designed windows just like this at her house over on Lone Pine Road. Aliel would design lots of leaded glass windows. But just the sort of formality of this facade with this great sort of blocky element. And Eero he knows about German modernism. He wants to be a modernist, but he's practicing in this Beaux-Arts system. And so I think the facade in this very Spartan effect combines his father's sense of kind of windows and window shapes and materials, the brick and stone, with Eero's own interest in modernism. The floor plan is where we really start to see the influence of Yale Saarinen on young Eero. So if you're just joining me, welcome. Hello, Beth. Hello, Lynette. Hello, Paul. Hello, Haley. Hello, Sam. Great to see you all and all the other followers. We are today looking at Eero Saarinen's Residence for a College Dean, a project he did in his first year at Yale. And we'll look through this entrance court. And so you come through these 2 pillars, which we can see from both the floor plan and on this drawing. They have these little 3-part stone columns, just like at Kingswood. So we go through this very Kingswood entrance, and then you see the front door. And of course, it's not just a house, but a house for entertaining. And so you start immediately with a sort of powder rooms for men and ladies and the coat rooms. And then he's designing not just the house, but he's also designing rugs for the spaces. And then you come in and you see the piano here, and then this group of furniture, and it's a little bit perhaps reading into it, but if we look at the design of the furniture, it's very close to what his father had designed for Saarinen House, with these kind of octagonal chairs paired with box chairs. And then also around the room, he proposed placing torchairs. And we can see those if we look down at the section cut. And so the way that he is really illuminating this room is the exact same way that his father illuminated their house here at Cranbrook. And so here we see Saarinen House at Cranbrook, and you see those torchères shining light up, and you see these tall vertical openings that repeat in Eero's design. And actually, I'm just noticing even the way that the doors sort of are inset in is very much something that Eero was doing here at Cranbrook. Now, from the living room, we move back and we see the dean's private study and then a library, which has its own entrance. And then on the other side, we see a long dining room. And I think that this arrangement of rooms where you come into the door and you're faced with these sort of three great options. You can look center lying down the dining room table. You can look center down the living room. Or you're not looking center, you're looking at an angle, or you can go up the stairs. It's very much the way that Eero Saarinen planned spaces, where you're sort of presented with options, and then you can head in multiple directions, this kind of fear of dead ends. Now, in the garage, we see two cool little 1930s cars, as well as the breakfast room. And then, of course, the butler's pantry, the kitchen, the cold kitchen, and the service dining room. And the cold kitchen is something that Saarinen House did not have. In Saarinen House, the butler's pantry and the cold kitchen were combined. And then, of course, a back stairway. And then if we look at the section cut, there's a few more details that are really just taken directly from his father's designs. So in the little lobby of the library, we see this half dome with a suspended light shooting light up, which is something that Eero Saarinen did at his own house. He did in the dining room with its dome and hanging light. He did it at Kingswood. He did it in the basement of Kingswood. There's really multiple times at Cranbrook's campus where you can find a vestibule almost identical to this. I already mentioned, and actually he even proposed cove lighting through the molding, which is something that Saarinen did in Millis's house here at Cranbrook. I already pointed out the torchères, but then there's also on the second floor, not only do you see these little stepped pyramids, those are recessed lighting, and another thing that Eero did throughout Kingswood. But if you look closely at the second floor doors, you see he's proposing some type of little stenciled decoration. And he must have had in mind something like what his sister had done in the upstairs hall at Saarinen House with Pipson's hand painting on each of the doors. And so you have this proposed drawing of a new college dean's house reflecting exactly some of the designs back at Cranbrook. And even the master bedroom with this great cove stepped ceiling is identical to the master bedroom here at Saarinen House. So Saarinen House, the family moved in 1930. Eero was studying sculpture at the time, but he certainly would have been aware of it because he helped design parts of that house. So it shouldn't be surprising that a 21-year-old designer who is incredibly self-conscious about his position under his father, he's self-conscious about the fact that all of his classmates knew his father was Eero Saarinen. And I think, he came out of a sculpture background. He had just been studying sculpture. He had been designing gates and ornaments. So it doesn't surprise me that with this early student drawing, there's so many elements that are lifted directly from Eero Saarinen's architecture and the new family home here at Cranbrook. That is part of an architect's education. He's not plagiarizing, but as some of my greatest instructors taught me, it's like when you're a student, you don't know how to detail a building. You can't just make that up. So you need to find a detail that you like and then just adapt that into your project. And it is, you learn by studying other buildings and then assembling them into something new. Now, on next Tuesday's lecture, we will be looking at a number of different student projects. And his classmates included people like Leslie Cheek, who would go on to become a really influential director at the Virginia Museum of Fine Arts, as well as a stage dresser. Who else were his classmates? Leslie Cheek is probably the most famous of his class year, Yale 34. His instructors included people like Raymond Hood. So Raymond Hood directed Eero Saarinen's senior project. And if that name seems familiar to you, it is because Raymond Hood is who beat Eero Saarinen in the Chicago Tribune Tower competition. So Raymond Hood and his partner, Mr. Howells, designed the Tribune Tower that you see in Chicago, and that beat out Eero Saarinen's design. Eero Saarinen's design is, of course, why the family immigrated to America from Finland, and then Raymond Hood would go on to design many sort of reproductions of Eero's design, like the Radiator Building or the RCA Building in Manhattan, which are very much indebted to Saarinen's design. Now, just in case you're less familiar, if you're bad at reading building plans, that is okay, but I hope this hasn't been too confusing for you. But I thought I would just compare the plan for a president's residence. This is Saarinen House here at Cranbrook, where you see Eero is creating this sort of forecourt, leading us into a square reception hall, leading us on axis through the front window, but then turning the axis so that it runs across from living room to dining room, and then opening up the other spaces in these sort of patterning of an asymmetrical entrance into an asymmetrical room that's then centered by a vault running through here. And I think it's very much a sort of planning pattern that we see repeated in the college dean's proposal. Now, just to sort of whet your appetite to some of the other pieces of Eero Saarinen and Associates material that are here in Cranbrook Archives, Laura McNewman, our associate archivist, helped me pull some of these pieces. And so if we would like, what is Eero Saarinen's most famous building? I heard it through the camera, the Gateway Arch. And so these are just some of the drawings of the arch that we have here at Cranbrook Archives. This one is by J. Barr. J. Barr was a associate of Eero Saarinen's. He studied at the University of Pennsylvania and then at Harvard. And he came to work for Yale Saarinen in the late 1940s. In 1950, he became one of the partners of Eero Saarinen and Associates, and he stayed there through the 50s. But he did most of the beautiful drawings of the Gateway Arch for the competition in 1948. And what do we notice about this arch that is different from the original? It is a trapezoid. And so as built, it would be built as an extruded triangle, but in the proposal, it was a trapezoid. And so you're looking at the arch. Downtown St. Louis would be on this side, and we're looking under the first bridge to bridge the Mississippi River from the early 20th century. This is a copy or a pencil drawing, a study for what would become the competition submission, which was a full 4 feet by 3 feet. So this is, half size, even smaller than half a size. And we see here that the arch doesn't quite have the right shape. So in the competition entry submitted in September of 1947, Eero designed a pure catenary arch, I believe. In the end, he would massage it with his sculpture's eye, and he would turn it into a non-mathematical derived arch. But here, he is pulling from pure geometry. The other big change that would happen, if we come up here and you know St. Louis well, the arch was originally not centered on the courthouse. So the arch today actually stands further inland and dead center on the courthouse. But as originally proposed, it was going to be in this great wood because Saarinen actually thought the best way to memorialize Thomas Jefferson was through nature. And so he questioned whether the arch needed to be there at all, or if the woods would be the true living memorial. And then as originally demanded by the competition, it also included housing and other facilities for St. Louis, as well as a museum, living memorial, and all sorts of civic resources. And then though his father was not involved, we see Eero Saarinen's great contribution with these trapezoidal shaped plazas. And then here are two other drawings by Barr. We don't have any arch drawings by Eero. Those are all at Yale in their archives. But we do have these wonderful colored pencil study drawings by Barr. And Barr was one of the 5 members of the committee, of the team. So it was led by Eero Saarinen, and then his wife Lily Swan Saarinen contributed sculpture. Alexander Gerard, the famous decorator and architect, was also on the team. Dan Kiley, the landscape architect, and then Barr was the associate designer. And then I just pulled out a picture in case you were wondering what I meant by a triangular shape. You see how it is just a 3-sided arch, which is the great suggestion of Carl Millis to transform it from a trapezoid with an interior flat edge into a triangle. So I hope that you enjoyed this look back at Eero Saarinen's student work from Yale. Next Tuesday, we will be having our 4th Uncovering Cranbrook lecture. It will be about Eero Saarinen as a student at Yale and then as an architect for Yale. We don't have anything at Cranbrook Archives about his designs for Yale, but after he graduated in 1934, he came back and he worked for his father here at Cranbrook. He taught briefly one tumultuous semester in which he took over most of his students' projects and then made them his own with his student partners, which was not exactly smiled upon. He then went off to Washington, D.C. for most of the war, where he designed places like the Situation Room at the White House. And then when he returned here to be partners with his father in the late 40s, the Gateway Arch is really what launched him out from under his father. His father's death in 1950 marked the start of his 11-year career. And between 1954 and 1962, he designed a number of projects for Yale, 3 of which were built. And so next week, during the Uncovering Cranbrook lecture series, we'll see more of his student work from Yale. We'll learn more about how that influenced the rest of his life and how winning the Architecture Travel Fellowship really enabled him to see the world out and make new drawings and how those impacted his career. And then the second half of the lecture will be all about Morse College, the greatest residential college at Yale and also where I lived for 4 years, as well as the sister college, Stiles, and the hockey rink, the Yale Whale. And so I hope that you will join me for that Uncovering Cranbrook lecture. It's a fun one. It's a topic that I love very dearly. And I think it's going to be the best Uncovering Cranbrook lecture yet. You can buy tickets at center.cranbrook.edu, and they're $20 a piece. And again, the lecture is at 10 a.m. Eastern and 7 p.m. Eastern. Same lecture. I'll be more awake at the 7 p.m., but the slides will be different because I'll have made changes. So I hope to see you then. If not, I'll be back on Facebook for another Live at 5 tomorrow. And then I'll be back here on Instagram next Tuesday for another Live at 5. The lectures are 1 hour with 15 minutes of question and answering, but I probably could go 3 hours. And there is a new form of our Instagram here, and so I'm looking through your comments. Hello, Rocco. Hello, Jess. Hello, Milo. Looks like my own father didn't join us today. Hello, Justin. Hello, My Michigan Home. Great to have you all here. I kind of actually like this new format of Instagram Live, so I hope it is doing well for you. I hope that you were able to find it. And I'll see you tomorrow on Facebook for Live at 5 at the Cranbrook Center for Collections and Research Facebook page, or I will see you next Tuesday for the Uncovering Cranbrook lecture series. And just because it is still the most exquisite fall I have seen, I'll leave you with the view from the Archives reading room. If you haven't had a chance yet to get to campus, it has been the most extraordinary fall, and still the leaves are giving us quite the resplendent show. So if you're local, do come up, find some peace and serenity here at Cranbrook. And with that, I will see you all next week. Did they move how to end it? I have no idea how to stop. That's the timing. The Volvo is over at my house. I walked here, get those steps in. Wow, this is exciting. Dun, dun, dun. Oh, now we're doing picture in a picture. Okay. Well, I hope I don't lose it.